Hey everybody, just adjusting my camera. How are you all doing today? I hope you're doing great. This is Julie B, and I really hope my mic is working. We're going to see. It says it's working, so I'm just going to assume that it's working. Okay. First of all, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't. And today I'm going to talk about how I think I figured out a story or a process about how to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is something that I talk about a lot. It is kind of a nebulous concept. And, somebody that I really have a lot of respect for is Brene Brown. And that's kind of her favorite thing to talk about, right? Like if you've watched any of her videos, or she has a series out on HBO Max, if you have that. Where when she gets to talk about vulnerability, she just kind of lights up. So it's pretty clear that that's like her favorite thing to talk about. And one thing I realized was, though, learning how to be vulnerable is hard for a lot of people. And, there's a lot of self work you can do, there's a lot of reflection you can do. There's just a lot of things you can do. And a lot of Brene Brown's books talk about how to be vulnerable or talk about like the benefit of being vulnerable. But when it comes to being vulnerable as a business owner, and really anywhere in your life, that first step is really hard. And vulnerability can show up in a lot of ways. I think ultimately, where we want to get with vulnerability is being able to ask people for help when we need it, or being able to just say, like, I'm not okay, and just can you be with me in this space of not being okay. But before you get to that, like, it's hard to go from someone who's not really used to being vulnerable to somebody who is really open, wears their heart on their sleeves, and that type of thing. And I've kind of always lived in that world. Well, maybe not always. My wife would say probably not always, but definitely over the last decade, I've come to realize the benefit and experience the joy that being vulnerable can bring. But to get to the process, there's one step that I think that can help people start to be vulnerable if you have a hard time being vulnerable. And it kind of came to me yesterday when I was doing a podcast interview, of all things, talking about storytelling. I think the first step in being vulnerable, or practicing that, is learning how to tell a story about a time when you did something that maybe you weren't proud of, or maybe you weren't embarrassed about, or maybe sometime where you failed. And you've gotten past it, you've learned lessons from it. And I mean, it can be something all the way back from when you were a kid that you were embarrassed about. um but telling a story about a time when you did something you weren't proud of, basically, and maybe what you learned from it, and also throw in some humor, just make fun of yourself a little bit. But also, like, that, I think that is probably a really good first step, is telling a story where, you weren't the hero. Maybe you were the villain. Maybe you did something really bad. When I was a kid in high school, or actually, no, I think this was middle school. I remember there was this one time that I was kind of a bully to a kid in class, and it was over the stupidest thing. It was over a left-handed desk. Um, and I did some things there that I was quite ashamed of, to the point where I actually, like, basically flipped her out of the desk because I wanted the left-handed desk, and I was the only left-handed kid in the class, and it was really a I don't know what was going on for me when I did that. I was probably having a really bad day. Luckily, I didn't get in trouble for it. I mean, or maybe I should have gotten in trouble for it, I should say, but the teacher wasn't in the room. And I did ask the person nicely and then kind of demanded, and this individual just kept saying no. And so eventually I was like, "This is my desk, get out of it." And I basically removed her from the desk by flipping her out of the desk. And I don't tell that story often, because when I look back at it, I mean, that was definitely a bullying type of behavior. Um, but I learned that from that. I learned that sometimes you just have to deal with what you're given. And in that case, I had my pick from right-handed desks, but Sometimes you can't get what you want exactly, so it's better to work with what you have than, be mean and bully to get the thing that you actually want. Um, so that that's an example of me being vulnerable, telling a story that I'm not proud of, even to this day, obviously, like, it still affects me. So I think, you don't have to tell stories like that. I mean, you can even tell stories about things that made you really sad or something that maybe you cried about. I don't know, along those lines. But I think that telling stories where you were in a moment of, either something you're not proud of or maybe something you deem as a weakness can help you become more vulnerable. And the great thing about that is you can practice those stories. And the other great thing about that is it's holiday time, so, I recognize not everybody has a family or, a chosen family of friends that they celebrate with, but if you are, in the position to have that coming, up here over the next couple of weeks where you're gonna be around family and friends, maybe you pick a story or 2 that you practice now so that you're ready to tell those stories and if you get the opportunity to tell them. I mean, don't force it if it doesn't make sense, but we're gonna have opportunities to tell stories and to be a little bit more vulnerable with our loved ones, here over the next couple of weeks. So I just thought that this was a very timely message, and I hope that one thing about vulnerability, one of the benefits is that it deepens your relationship with people. I think one of the reasons I tell you stories, like the one I just told, is it makes me feel like we have a deeper relationship, and I hope it makes you feel like you know me a little bit better as well. Sorry, I keep playing with my microphone. Like I'm worried that it's not working because of the problem I had a couple of weeks ago, but it does seem to be working. So yeah, I think I'm going to explore this a little bit more in the new year. Creating, one thing I love to do is create a process around nebulous topics. Vulnerability. We know the benefits of vulnerability and being vulnerable, but sometimes actually doing it is hard. And I think if we can separate out um, much like creating a process around burnout or around leadership, if we can, have things that we can check off to do to practice, eventually we'll be able to be more vulnerable comfortably, and everybody can experience those benefits that Brene Brown loves to talk about. So that's the big thing for today, and I really want to encourage you all to practice vulnerability through storytelling if you can. Just another couple of things I wanted to mention. I realized I talk a lot about having thinking time, and I think that this time with you is part of my thinking time during the week. So, thank you for giving me the space. And I know some of you watch this usually on replay. So, thank you for allowing me to have this space with you. And just some things you might have noticed that the thumbnail for this video is me with a painted giraffe laying on the floor. Herbert McDougal is the name of that giraffe. I inherited that giraffe, about I don't know, it's probably been at least 10 years ago now from my, mother-in-law who just recently passed away, and Herbert sits I'm looking at it right now, he sits on a table in my office, and, he has a whole backstory, but I just wanted to add some flavor and some fun. And one thing my wife tells me is that a lot of people don't get to see the side of me, like the goofy, silly, just all over the place, kind of kid at heart side. So, yeah, Herbert has a whole backstory. I have a pretty wild imagination. He's a MD, he's a doctor, he's a dermatologist. He has a whole song about him that I created. And he has had that for a long time. So maybe someday I'll get up the courage to share more of that story with you, but I'm not going to sing the song right now because I'm not a great singer. But that's Herbert McDougal. That was the picture of him. The other thing I wanted to mention, so this is a little bit of a not vulnerable time, but I just won a major award. It's a major award. If you have ever watched the movie A Christmas Story, you will get it's a major award. I wish I had, like, a whole box to lift it out of, but I think it's funny because of the movie and all of that's tied into that. But I did actually get I don't know if you can see this, but this is my Davy Award, my Davy Gold Award for being best podcast host. So last week, I talked about how I lost to Viola Davis, but I referenced some awards that we have won. This is one of them. It came in the mail the other day, and this means a lot. This is, 2.5, almost 3 years of work. And it's certainly not just me. I have a team, Chris Melton, very important. I guess this is kind of my acceptance speech, but no, Chris Melton's super important to this. If anybody out there wants to start a podcast, I would highly recommend talking to him. You can hit me up if you want his information, and I'll give it to you. And then also, I would be super remiss if I didn't mention Eileen Sleesher. She's key production person. Like, she makes sure this happens. Without her, like, this would not happen. I am really just the person talking into the microphone and doing the interviews. That's what I tell people behind the scenes. Chris calls me the talent. I don't know what Eileen might call me to her family, but I'm sure it's not not really the true winner. There's a lot of people that have supported me along the way, so I just want to say thank you to that. And of course, obviously, my wife Marcy. Um, she's always there to tell me you talk too much or you don't talk enough, or also, like, that was a really good episode. Like, that was really interesting. I really like your how you do your podcast compared to some of the other ones that I listen to. Just honest feedback, but always encouraging, and always, if it is a constructive criticism, it's always to make me better. So there's a lot of people that have helped make that happen. um, it's really nice to hold that hefty award. It's got some heft to it. So it's nice to have that, but it's a major award, as the old man Parker would say on Christmas Story. So I think that's it. I'm not going to do any more videos. This is the last video for the year. I am about to head out to a Christmas market to celebrate some things in my family, some birthdays and stuff, as well as the holidays. So gonna head out to that, and I will be back the first week of January. I'm sure over the next 2 weeks, I'll have a lot of things to think about and share with you when I come back. So hopefully you can join me live then. But until then, happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah, just gleeful winter solstice. That's coming up. And just a merry everything. Just really, really try to enjoy this time of year if you can. I know it's hard for some, but I hope that all of you can find some joy, and maybe even deepen some relationships through storytelling to get a little bit more vulnerable with those you love. I'll see you next year.